The sun was setting on the horizon of Rocky Ridge, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that reflected in the windows of the Blackwell Ranch main house. Jack watched over his property from the high veranda, a glass of whiskey in his right hand and a cigar hanging from his thin lips. His cold eyes scanned the lush pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see, but his true pride was in the main stable. Thunder was a breathtaking sight. The white quarter horse gleamed. Under the last rays of sunlight, its majestic bearing attracting admiring glances from passing workers. The animal was more than a horse. It was a $500,000 investment, a status symbol that Jack proudly displayed at the most prestigious events in Montana. "Tomorrow is the day of the big auction in Great Falls," he muttered to himself, taking another sip of his drink. "Thunder is going to cause a sensation. All those ranchers will die of envy when they see his performances." In the stable, Bill, the ranch's oldest handler, was finishing brushing the animal's coat. His calloused hands moved gently over the silky fur while he murmured words of affection. Unlike his boss, Bill saw beyond Thunder's monetary value. He perceived the intelligence in the animal's eyes, the nobility in its movements, the sensitivity with which it reacted to human touch. "The boss doesn't understand, does he, big guy?" Bill whispered, making sure no one heard him. "You're too special to be treated just like merchandise." The horse whinnied softly, as if understanding every word. Bill smiled, but his smile soon faded when he heard Jack's firm footsteps approaching. The rancher entered the stable with his usual stern expression, followed by two men in expensive suits that Bill had never seen before. "This is the champion," Jack announced proudly, gesturing towards Thunder. "Pure blood, impeccable pedigree. He's already won 3 state competitions this year." The men approached, evaluating the animal with critical eyes. One of them, taller and with graying hair, nodded in approval. "Impressive, Blackwell. How much do you want for him?" "He's not for sale," Jack replied dryly. "Tomorrow he goes to the auction in Great Falls. The starting bid will be $600,000. Bill, who was still there, felt a tightness in his chest. It was the first time he had heard about Thunder being sold. The animal, as if sensing the tension in the air, stirred slightly in its stall. "Bill, you can go now," Jack ordered without even looking at the employee, "and prepare everything for tomorrow's trip. We leave at 5 in the morning." The handler hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting Thunder's one last time before leaving the stable with his head down. On the horizon, dark clouds were beginning to form, promising a night of storms. While the men continued their conversation about values and business, Thunder remained restless in his stall. The wind began to blow harder, making the stable doors creak. The animal moved its ears, attentive to every change in the environment, as if sensing that something was about to happen. In the employee quarters, Bill sat on his simple bed, unable to sleep. Jack's words echoed in his mind. Sell Thunder, the animal he had helped raise since it was a colt? His heart ached, just thinking about the uncertain fate that awaited the noble horse. The first thunder rumbled in the distance, making the window panes tremble. The storm was approaching rapidly, bringing with it a premonition of change. In the stable, Thunder raised his head, his eyes reflecting the lightning that began to cut through the night sky. The night promised to be long in Rocky Ridge, and no one could predict how it would end. Fate was about to show its strength, reminding everyone that some precious things cannot be measured in money. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. The storm broke over Rocky Ridge with unexpected fury. Lightning cut across the sky in succession, transforming night into day for brief moments, while the wind howled among the century-old trees on the property. In the main stable of Blackwell Ranch, the horses stirred in their stalls, restless with the violence of the elements. Thunder was the most disturbed. His hooves nervously pounded against the packed earth floor, and his breathing became increasingly rapid with each thunderclap that shook the stable structures. Sweat began to bead on his white coat, which had been so meticulously brushed by Bill earlier. In the main house, Jack woke to the noise of the storm. Irritated by the interrupted sleep, he got up to close the banging windows. That's when he heard a different sound rising above the roar of the storm, a desperate whinny coming from the stable. Damn it, he cursed, hastily putting on a robe over his pajamas. If anything happened to Thunder on the eve of the auction. Before he could leave, the phone rang. It was Tom, the night watchman, his voice trembling with nervousness. "Boss, it's Thunder. He's really agitated. Never seen him like this. I tried to calm him, but..." A deafening crash interrupted the conversation. The lightning flash was so intense, it illuminated the entire room, followed instantly by a thunderclap that seemed to make the earth shake. On the other end of the line, Jack heard shouts and the sound of wood splintering. "Tom, what's happening?" "He broke down the stall door, boss. He's running to the pasture. For God's sake, come here." Jack ran through the rain, cursing with every step that sank into the mud. Other employees were already running towards the stable, their flashlights forming a dance of lights in the darkness. Bill, who had also heard the commotion, arrived at the scene breathless. In the pasture, the scene was surreal. Thunder was running in circles, his white coat gleaming with each lightning strike like a supernatural specter. His eyes, always so serene, were now wide with terror. Mud splashed with each gallop as he continued his frantic run. "Surround him!" shouted Jack, his voice almost lost in the storm. "Don't let him get near the fence." Bill, however, sensed the danger. "No! It'll scare him even more," but it was too late. The ranch hands were approaching with ropes and flashlights, trying to form a circle around the panicked animal. That's when it happened. Thunder, cornered, abruptly changed direction. His hooves, which had so impressed in competitions, now betrayed him on the waterlogged ground. The horse slipped, tried to recover, but its own momentum brought it to the ground with a dull thud that was heard even above the noise of the storm. The silence that followed was deafening. Thunder tried to get up, but his hind legs wouldn't respond. His whinnies were now of pain, no longer of fear. Bill was the first to reach him, his heart breaking at the sight of the animal's suffering. "Call a vet, quick!" shouted the handler, his gentle hands trying to calm the fallen horse. Jack arrived soon after, but his eyes showed no concern, only cold calculation. He observed the animal struggling in the mud for a few moments before giving his verdict. "There will be no vet." "But, boss," Bill began to protest. "He's no good for anything anymore," Jack cut in dryly. "A crippled horse isn't worth the price of treatment." The rain continued to fall, mixing with the silent tears that ran down Bill's face. Thunder, exhausted, had stopped struggling, but his eyes seemed to finally understand the true nature of his owner. The dawn arrived cold and misty in Rocky Ridge. The storm had ceased, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a heavy silence that hung over the ranch. In the bed of an old pickup truck, Thunder lay motionless, covered by a soaked tarp. Tom held the steering wheel reins with trembling hands, while Jack's words echoed in his mind. "Take him to the abandoned Indian burial ground. Nobody will look for him there," the boss had ordered, with a coldness that made the employee's blood freeze. "And don't come back until you finish the job." The journey was long and bumpy. The dirt road, battered by the previous night's rain, now seemed more like a treacherous quagmire. Each jolt elicited a muffled groan from the injured animal, making Tom's heart ache. He had known Thunder since the horse was just a colt, had helped Bill in his daily care. Now he was taking him, to be abandoned as if he were trash. As they approached their destination, the landscape subtly changed. The trees became more twisted, their bare branches extending like bony fingers towards the grey sky. A low mist snaked between the trunks, giving the place an almost supernatural atmosphere. The air seemed denser, laden with an invisible weight. That made Tom's breathing become shorter. The Indian burial ground appeared like an apparition among the mist. Ancient and deteriorated headstones emerged from the uneven ground, some toppled by time, others still standing, silent witnesses to an almost forgotten history. Tom parked the pickup near the entrance, where the ground was firmer. His hands were trembling when he got down to open the truck bed. "Forgive me, big guy," he murmured, removing the tarp that covered Thunder. The horse, once so proud, could now barely lift his head. His eyes, though clouded with pain, still maintained that spark of intelligence that had always impressed everyone. With a reluctant push, Tom made the animal slide out of the truck bed. The dull thud of the body against the ground was followed. by a painful whinny that echoed through the cemetery, causing some birds to take flight from nearby trees. Thunder tried to get up, but his hind legs still wouldn't respond. As he observed the scene, something caught Tom's attention. A movement in the periphery of his vision, like a shadow sliding between the headstones. For an instant, he had the impression of seeing a tall, slender figure dressed in traditional Native American attire, but when he blinked, there was nothing there but the mist dancing between the stones. The wind suddenly changed direction, bringing with it a strange aroma of burnt herbs and wet earth. The leaves of the trees began to whisper, as if conversing in an ancient and forgotten language. Tom felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something about this place, something that went beyond the simple sadness of an abandoned cemetery. From afar, partially hidden by the dense vegetation, John Eagleheart observed everything with his wise and ancient eyes. The old guardian of the sacred cemetery immediately perceived that this was not a common occurrence. The very earth seemed to respond to the presence of the injured horse, as if recognizing in him a special force. Tom quickly got into the pickup, unable to bear any more time in that oppressive environment. Before starting the engine, he looked one last time at Thunder through the rearview mirror. The white horse lying among the ancient headstones seemed strangely at peace, as if it had found its place. The pickup's engine roared, breaking the mystical silence of the place. As the vehicle moved away, leaving behind a cloud of dust, the wind began to blow again, stronger this time. The trees bowed, their leaves dancing in an ancestral ritual, and in the shadows of the cemetery, something began to awaken. Night was falling over the Indian burial ground when the first howls began to echo through the woods. The coyotes, attracted by the scent of the injured animal, emerged from the shadows with bright, hungry eyes. Thunder, still lying among the ancient headstones, sensed the approach of the predators. His survival instinct screamed for him to try to get up one more time, but his body wouldn't respond to the desperate commands. The coyotes approached in a circle, their silent paws on the damp earth. There were 5 in total, lean and determined, guided by the promise of easy prey. The largest of them, a male with grey fur and old scars, stepped forward, revealing sharp fangs in a low growl. It was then that something extraordinary happened. The wind, which until then had been blowing softly, changed direction abruptly. A strong and unexpected gust swept through the cemetery, carrying with it a penetrating aroma of unknown herbs and smoke. The coyotes hesitated, their ears moving nervously, picking up sounds that went beyond human comprehension. From the shadows between the trees emerged John Eagleheart. The old guardian moved with the grace of one who knows every stone and root of the terrain. His long, straight grey hair swayed in the wind as he walked towards the fallen horse. In his hands, he carried a small ceramic container decorated with ancestral symbols. "You will not have him tonight," his deep voice rumbled through the cemetery, speaking both to the coyotes and to invisible forces that seemed to inhabit this sacred place. He was brought here for a greater purpose. The predators took a few steps back, confused by the man's presence. The pack leader still maintained his threatening posture, but something in the air had changed. The very atmosphere of the cemetery seemed denser, charged with an ancient and powerful energy that made the animals feel uneasy. John approached Thunder with deliberately slow steps. The horse, which would normally be startled by the approach of a stranger, remained strangely calm. His intelligent eyes followed each movement of the guardian, as if recognizing in him a familiar presence. "You carry the spirit of the ancients, my friend," John murmured, kneeling beside the animal. "I can see it in your eyes. The same strength that my ancestors saw in the first horses that stepped on these lands." From the ceramic container, he removed a dark, aromatic paste made of macerated herbs and other mysterious ingredients. With precise and gentle movements, he began to apply the preparation to Thunder's injured legs, murmuring words in an ancient language that seemed to make the very stones of the cemetery vibrate. The coyotes watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. The pack leader took another step forward, as if testing the invisible boundaries that now protected his intended prey. It was then that Thunder, gathering strength he didn't know he possessed, raised his head and let out a neigh. It wasn't a sound of fear or pain. It was an ancestral call, deep and powerful, that echoed through the cemetery like thunder. The effect was immediate. The coyotes retreated, as if they had received an electric shock, their tails low in a sign of submission. Within seconds they disappeared into the darkness of the woods, leaving only the echo of their hasty steps. John smiled, satisfied. "You are already beginning to awaken," he said, continuing to apply the ointment to the animal's legs. "The earth recognizes its own, and you, my friend, have been chosen for something greater." The night advanced, and with it, a transformation began to take place in the heart of the woods. John had built a makeshift shelter for Thunder near his cabin, using branches and palm leaves to protect him from the night dew. The horse, once accustomed to the comfort of the ranch stable, seemed to naturally adapt to the simplicity of this new life. Every morning, before the sun even rose, John prepared his mixtures of medicinal herbs. His agile fingers separated leaves, roots and barks, knowledge passed down through generations of his ancestors. The aroma that emanated from his clay pot spread through the clearing, attracting curious birds that perched on nearby branches to observe the daily ritual. "The herbs are just a pathway," John explained to the horse as he applied the preparations to his injured legs. "True healing comes from the spirit of the earth, from the strength of the ancestors who inhabit this sacred place." Thunder seemed to understand every word. His eyes, once clouded by pain, now shone with a different intensity. At night, when the full moon bathed the cemetery with its silver light, the horse would raise his head and observe the sky with an almost human attention. It was on one of these nights that something extraordinary happened. John was in his cabin, preparing another of his ointments, when he heard a different neigh. Upon going outside, he found Thunder standing, his hind legs firmly against the ground that days before he couldn't even feel. But it wasn't just that. There was something more in his posture, an almost supernatural aura that made his white coat shine with its own light. "You are ready," John murmured, approaching the animal. "The earth has accepted you as one of its guardians." As if responding to the old man's words, Thunder began to move. His steps, once hesitant, now had a new grace, as if he were floating over the sacred ground. He headed towards the cemetery, followed closely by John, who observed everything with reverence. Among the ancient headstones, the horse stopped. His body emanated a palpable energy that made the air vibrate. The mist, which always hung low over the place, began to move in an unnatural way, circling the animal as if dancing around him. The nearby trees bent slightly, their leaves whispering ancient secrets. "The spirits of the earth are manifesting through you," said John, his voice barely containing the emotion. "You are no longer just a horse. You are a messenger between two worlds." At Blackwell Ranch, things were beginning to change in a subtle but significant way. The horses in the main stable were becoming increasingly agitated, especially during full moon nights. Some employees reported hearing strange neighs coming from the woods, different from any sound they had ever heard before. Bill, who was still suffering from Thunder's fate, was the first to notice something different in his morning routine. The pregnant mares, which used to graze peacefully, now gathered at the fence closest to the woods, their heads turned towards the direction of the Indian burial ground, as if waiting for something or someone. Back at the cemetery, Thunder was exploring his new senses. He could perceive vibrations in the ground that previously went unnoticed, capture scents that told ancient stories, hear sounds that went beyond normal range. His body, once molded for competitions and exhibitions, was now adapting to a much deeper purpose. John observed the transformation with a mixture of pride and respect. He knew that this was just the beginning. The earth had chosen its new guardian, and through Thunder, ancient forces were beginning to awaken. The balance was about to be restored, and those who had forgotten the sacred value of life would learn a lesson they would never forget. The prosperity that had always marked Blackwell Ranch was beginning to show signs of change. It was as if an invisible force had altered the natural course of things, affecting everything Jack valued most. His competition horses, once examples of obedience and performance, now refused to run, balking on the tracks or simply ignoring the trainer's commands. On the morning of the big auction in Great Falls, an event Jack had planned for months, his most valuable stallion, a thoroughbred valued at over $1 million, woke up different. His eyes, normally lively and alert, were opaque, and no handler could make him move from his stall. "This is a curse," shouted old Joe, the oldest handler in the region, who had been working with horses for over 50 years. "Something's wrong in the air, boss. The animals are different. They seem to be waiting for something." Jack dismissed the old man's words with an irritated gesture, but deep down, an uneasiness began to gnaw at his certainty. The business, always lucrative before, began to go wrong in inexplicable ways. Buyers backed out at the last moment, award-winning horses lost their market value, and even the weather seemed to conspire against his crops. During the nights, especially when the moon was full, strange sounds echoed across the property. The oldest employees swore they heard neighs that didn't seem to come from anywhere, as if floating in the air. The mares in the pasture became agitated for no apparent reason, all turning their heads in the same direction, towards the Indian burial ground. Bill, who continued his routine in the stable with a heavy heart due to Thunder's absence, was the first to notice a pattern in the events. Every time Jack planned a new sale or negotiation that aimed only at profit, something inexplicable happened to prevent it. "It's as if the earth itself were rebelling," he commented to Mary, his wife, on a particularly restless night. As if something or someone was protecting the animals from the boss's greed. At the ranch house, Jack tried to maintain control over his crumbling empire. Sitting in his library, surrounded by trophies and photographs of award-winning horses, he drank more than usual. His eyes constantly turned to Thunder's portrait, the magnificent white quarter horse that had been his greatest pride. "There must be a way to reverse this," he muttered to himself, refusing to accept that forces beyond his comprehension could be acting against him. That's when one of the youngest ranch hands, Pete, came running into the house, disregarding the etiquette rules that Jack so valued. "Boss, you need to see this on the old road near the cemetery." "What is it, boy? Spit it out," Jack bellowed, irritated by the interruption. "A white horse, boss, just like Thunder. He was standing in the middle of the road, shining as if he was made of moonlight. When we got close, he disappeared into the mist, but I swear I saw—" Jack stood up abruptly, knocking over the whiskey glass on the mahogany table. This wasn't the first story he had heard about mysterious apparitions, but something in the genuine terror in the boy's eyes made his blood run cold. The news spread quickly through the region. Travelers passing by the road near the Indian burial ground began to report encounters with a supernatural white horse. They said it emerged from the mist like a ghost, its eyes shining with ancient wisdom, and that its presence made other animals instantly calm down. Meanwhile, in the heart of the sacred cemetery, John observed the changes with a serene smile. The transformation was complete. Thunder had become more than a guardian. He was now a living symbol of the connection between the world of men and the world of spirits, a reminder that some things cannot be measured in money or possessions. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. Jack Blackwell's office, once a symbol of power and prosperity, now seemed more like a fortress where he entrenched himself against the changes he couldn't control. The papers on his desk told a story of decline, cancelled contracts, growing losses, buyers backing out at the last moment. His reputation, built over decades, was beginning to crumble like sand between his fingers. "Enough," he shouted, punching the desk hard enough to make the whiskey bottle topple. "I won't let superstitions and ghost stories destroy everything I've built." The decision was made. That very night he would personally go to the Indian burial ground to investigate the rumors. If there really was a white horse scaring his employees and driving away his business, he would uncover the truth. He grabbed his hunting rifle, not to use, he told himself, but to feel safer. Bill, who was passing through the hallway at that moment, heard the commotion inside the office. His heart raced when he saw Jack coming out with the gun. Something in his gut told him that this night would be different from all others. "Boss, you shouldn't go there," he risked saying. "There are things we don't understand, forces that—" "Shut up," Jack cut him off. "I'm sick of these ghost stories. If there's anything happening in that cemetery, I'm going to find out tonight." The sun was already setting when Jack mounted his toughest horse, a chestnut with a temperament as strong as his own. The full moon was beginning to rise on the horizon, large and silvery, painting elongated shadows on the path leading to the woods. In the Indian burial ground, John sensed the change in the energy of the place. The trees whispered louder, the wind carried a premonition of confrontation. Thunder, now fully recovered and transformed, also felt the approach of danger. His white coat emanated a soft glow in the twilight, his eyes reflecting an ancient wisdom. "He comes seeking answers," John murmured, his deep voice mingling with the wind. "But he is not ready for the truths. He will find—" Jack's chestnut grew more nervous with each step it took towards the cemetery. Its hooves beat heavily against the ground, as if protesting against the rider's will. The air grew denser, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand up. That's when the first neigh cut through the night. It wasn't a common sound, it was deep, ancestral, as if coming from the very bowels of the earth. The chestnut reared up, almost throwing Jack off. Among the ancient headstones, a form began to materialize in the mist. Thunder appeared like an apparition, his white coat shining with its own light that seemed to emanate from within. His eyes, once gentle, now carried the weight of millennia, of wisdom. He was no longer the competition horse Jack had known. He was a force of nature, a guardian of the ancient secrets of the earth. "It's not possible," Jack muttered, his arrogance giving way to fear for the first time. You were injured. You should have—" Before he could complete the sentence, Thunder took a step forward. The ground beneath his hooves seemed to vibrate, and the mist around him danced as if it had a life of its own. His neigh was now a roar of power that made the very stones of the cemetery tremble. Jack's chestnut couldn't take it. With a sudden movement, it reared up again, throwing its rider to the ground. The rifle flew from his hands, falling among the headstones. The horse galloped off towards the ranch, leaving Jack alone, face to face with what his pride had created. Fallen on the damp earth of the cemetery, Jack found himself stripped of all the power and control that had always been his trademarks. The full moon's light revealed every detail of the surreal scene, the ancient headstones projecting mysterious shadows, the mist dancing like restless spirits, and Thunder, majestic and supernatural, standing just a few meters away. The rancher tried to get up, but his legs were shaking. It wasn't just fear. It was a deeper sensation, as if all the weight of his actions over the years was finally falling on his shoulders. Thunder's presence was oppressive, charged with an energy that made the air vibrate. What do you want from me?" Jack stammered, his voice losing all the authority it used to carry. In response, Thunder took a step forward. His hooves made no sound as they touched the ground, as if he were floating over the sacred earth. His eyes, once merely expressive, now seemed to contain entire galaxies, deep, mysterious, ancestral. The mist around him moved in an unnatural way, forming patterns that resembled ancient Native American symbols. It was then that John emerged from the shadows, his tall and imposing figure materializing beside the white horse. The old guardian showed no hostility, only a serene calm that contrasted with Jack's internal chaos. "The earth speaks through him now," John said, his deep voice echoing through the cemetery. "He has become a messenger between two worlds, a guardian of the secrets you have always ignored in your pursuit of wealth and power." The words hit Jack like precise arrows. Images began to pass through his mind. All the animals he had treated as mere merchandise, the employees he had humiliated, the land he had exploited without respect or consideration. Each memory brought with it a wave of shame and regret. Thunder neighed again, but this time the sound carried a different melody. It was no longer a demonstration of power, but a call to awaken. The mist around him expanded, enveloping Jack. in a cold and revealing embrace. The rancher felt as if he were being transported through time, witnessing the history of that land through the eyes of the ancestors. He saw the first peoples who inhabited that place, their deep connection with nature, the respect with which they treated every living being. He saw the first horses arriving in the Americas, not as tools or merchandise, but as partners in an ancient dance between man and nature. And he saw, with painful clarity, how his own greed had corrupted this harmony. "All this time, Jack," murmured, tears running down his aged face. "All this time I've been so blind." John approached, his steps as silent as thunders. "It's never too late to awaken to the truth," he said, extending his hand to help Jack stand up. "The earth is generous with those who learn to respect it." Thunder also approached, his presence now less intimidating, more welcoming. Jack, trembling, raised his hand towards the animal's muzzle. The touch was like an electric current, not of pain but of understanding. At that moment, all the barriers he had built over a lifetime of unbridled ambition began to crumble. The full moon continued its course across the sky, a silent witness to a transformation that went far beyond the physical. In the heart of the Indian burial ground, among ancient headstones and forgotten stories, a man began to awaken to a truth, greater than all the money and power he had ever possessed. The news that Jack had spent the night in the Indian burial ground quickly spread through Blackwell Ranch. The employees noticed something different about their boss when he returned. The following morning, it wasn't just his disheveled appearance or distant look. There was something deeper, a fundamental change that no one could quite explain. Bill was the first to notice the practical transformations. On the Monday following the incident, Jack called all the employees for a meeting in the ranch's central courtyard. The morning sun was still gentle when he began to speak, his voice carrying a tone that no one there had ever heard before. "For years I measured the value of everything and everyone here by the money they could bring me," he began, surprising everyone with his raw honesty. "But I learned, in the hardest way possible, that there are things that cannot be bought or sold, values that go beyond any bank account." The changes began that very day. Work schedules were readjusted to better respect the well-being of the animals. The stable stalls were renovated, becoming more spacious and comfortable. The training of the horses began to be conducted with patience and respect, without the pressures and brutalities of before. But the biggest surprise came when Jack announced that part of the ranch lands would be transformed into a sanctuary for rescued horses. The project, developed in partnership with John Eagleheart, envisioned the recovery of mistreated and abandoned animals, offering them a safe and dignified home. "Are you sure about this, boss?" asked Bill, still incredulous about the change. "This is going to cost a fortune." "I'm more sure about this than any other decision I've ever made in my life," Jack replied, a different gleam in his eyes. "Besides, Bill, I think it's time you stopped calling me boss. We're all guardians of this land now." The news of Blackwell Ranch's transformation spread through the region like wildfire. Many doubted at first, thinking it was just a marketing strategy or a moment of temporary madness. But as the months passed, even the most skeptical began to realize that the change was real and profound. The ranch's horses also seemed different. The nervousness that once dominated the stable gave way to an almost palpable calm. The mares returned to foaling normally, and the colts were born strong and healthy. It was as if an ancient blessing had been restored, returning the natural balance to those lands. John became a constant presence on the ranch, sharing his ancestral knowledge about caring for animals and the land. His medicinal herbs and traditional healing techniques were incorporated into the routine of the place, creating a bridge between modern knowledge and ancient wisdom. On full moon nights, some employees swore they saw a white horse grazing near the fence that bordered the ranch and the woods. Its presence, once feared, was now received with reverence and gratitude. Thunder had become more than a legend. He was a living symbol of the transformation possible when the heart opens to truths greater than one's own ego. Jack, who used to spend his days locked in the office counting profits and planning business deals, could now often be seen in the pastures, observing the horses with a look of deep respect. His hands, once occupied only with signing checks and contracts, now learned to feel the texture of the earth, to identify medicinal herbs, to touch the animals with gentleness. "You know, Bill," he said one afternoon as they watched the sunset on the ranch's horizon, "I always thought success meant having more than others. Now I understand that true success is learning to live in harmony with everything and everyone around us." Blackwell Ranch had become a living example that transformation is possible, no matter how long one has lived in error. The ancient stories of the indigenous peoples, which spoke of the sacred connection between man, animal, and earth, gained new life through the actions of those who now cared for that piece of land. A year had passed since the night that forever changed the fate of Blackwell Ranch. The property, once known only for its competition horses, now attracted visitors from all over the country interested in seeing the sanctuary that had become a model of respect and conservation. On a particularly special morning, Jack walked through the pasture accompanied by a group of children from the local school. His hair had completely whitened in the last year, but his eyes carried a youthful vitality, especially when he talked about his new mission. "Each animal has its own story, its own soul," he explained to the marveling children. "Our task is not to dominate them, but to learn from them, to respect them as partners in this journey we call life." The sanctuary had already rescued more than 50 horses, each with its own story of overcoming. The old competition stables had been transformed into recovery areas, where veterinarians worked side by side with traditional healers, combining modern medicine with ancestral wisdom. John, who now directed an environmental education program on the ranch, smiled as he saw the complete transformation of the place. The medicinal herbs that once grew only in the Indian burial ground were now cultivated in a special garden, where visitors learned about their uses and sacred meanings. "The earth always knew what it was doing," the old guardian commented to Bill as they watched Jack with the children. "Sometimes it needs to use extraordinary means to awaken sleeping hearts." At night, when the full moon hung over the ranch, a special spectacle took place. The sanctuary horses, as if responding to a silent call, gathered near the border with the woods. It was in these moments that Thunder usually appeared. His presence no longer caused fear or astonishment. The magnificent white horse emerged from the mist like an ancestral guardian, his coat shining with its own light. He walked among the other horses with supernatural dignity, bringing with him a peace that could be felt by all present. Jack, who now understood the true meaning of that presence, maintained a respectful distance. There was no longer any need to possess or control. The most valuable lesson he had learned was that some things don't belong to us. We belong to them. "Look," he said to one of the children who had stayed for the evening, "how free and majestic he is. This is the true nature of all beings. We weren't born to live in cages, whether they're made of iron or greed." Blackwell Ranch had become more than an animal sanctuary. It was a place of healing and transformation for all who arrived there. The ancient stories of the indigenous peoples, which spoke of the sacred connection between all living beings, gained new life through the daily actions of care and respect. And on full moon nights, when Thunder appeared with his majestic presence, everyone could feel the ancient magic that still lived in those lands. He was no longer just a horse. He had become a living symbol that there is always hope for transformation, that it's never too late to choose a better path. The wind that blew through the ranch now carried not only the aroma of medicinal herbs and the sound of free hooves on the earth, but also a promise that when we open our hearts to truths greater than ourselves, miracles happen. And so the legend of the White Horse of Rocky Ridge lived on, inspiring future generations to preserve the sacred harmony between man, animal, and nature. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Jack's journey of transformation and Thunder's magical presence have touched your hearts. To continue exploring stories that celebrate the connection between humans, animals, and the ancestral wisdom of our land, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging narratives. You can find it here on the left side of the video. If this story awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring new stories that remind us of life's deepest truths. Share your own experiences of transformation and connection with nature in the comments. Together we keep the magic of ancient traditions alive